When the Wall Street executive in his $1,000 shoes sneered at the farmer's rusted truck parked outside Hank's diner, calling it a disgrace to American roads, neither man could have imagined that within the hour, that same beat-up Ford would become the only vehicle capable of rescuing the presidential motorcade from disaster. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist hung low over Millbrook, Iowa, as Samuel Whitfield guided Old Belle down County Road 47 toward town. The 1978 Ford F-150 wheezed and rattled with each pothole, its rust-red paint, more rust than red at this point, telling the story of 46 years of faithful service. Sam had inherited the truck from his father the same year he took over the family farm, and despite offers from collectors and concerned relatives, he'd never considered replacing her. As he pulled into the gravel parking lot of Hank's Highway diner, Sam noticed the unusual bustle in town. Black SUVs lined Main Street, and men in dark suits spoke into their sleeves while scanning rooftops. The president was coming to Millbrook, a campaign stop at the regional high school, to discuss rural infrastructure and agricultural policy. Sam had seen presidents come and go, but the security circus never failed to amuse him. Inside the diner, the breakfast crowd buzzed with excitement. Farmers in worn Carhartt jackets occupied their usual corner booth, while a group of suited strangers, clearly out-of-towners, clustered near the window. Sam nodded to Hank Thompson, who was already pouring his regular black coffee. Harrison Sterling III sat among the suited group, his Patek Philippe watch catching the morning light as he gestured animatedly. The Wall Street executive had flown in from Manhattan on his private jet, ostensibly to scout investment opportunities in America's heartland, though his barely concealed disdain for everything rural suggested otherwise. His Italian leather shoes, worth more than most locals' monthly mortgage payments, remained spotless despite the muddy spring conditions outside. As Sam settled onto his usual counterstool, Sterling's voice carried across the diner. "I still can't believe people actually choose to live like this," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Look at that thing parked outside. Is that even street legal?" He pointed through the window at Old Belle, drawing laughs from his entourage. The local farmers shifted uncomfortably, recognizing Sam's truck. Hank paused mid-pour, his jaw tightening. Sam simply sipped his coffee, his weathered hands steady on the warm mug. Sterling continued his performance, emboldened by his audience. "In New York, we have regulations, standards. That rusty heap wouldn't last 5 minutes on Fifth Avenue before being towed." He turned to his assistant, Victoria Chen, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Make a note. When we develop this area, first thing we do is implement vehicle appearance ordinances." The diner fell silent, except for the hiss of the coffee maker. Sam set down his mug with deliberate care and turned slowly on his stool. At 68, he moved with the measured patience of someone who had learned long ago that hurrying rarely improved outcomes. His faded denim shirt and worn boots stood in stark contrast to Sterling's tailored suit. "That truck you're mocking," Sam said quietly, his voice carrying the gravel of age and early mornings, "has plowed snow for this county for 4 decades, hauled sandbags during the floods of '93 and '08, pulled more vehicles out of ditches than I can count." He paused, meeting Sterling's eyes. "But you're right about one thing. She wouldn't last 5 minutes on Fifth Avenue. She's built for real work, not showing off." Sterling's perfectly groomed eyebrows rose in amusement. "Real work, please. That thing's a tetanus shot waiting to happen, a relic from a bygone era, just like..." He gestured vaguely at the diner's interior. "All of this. Progress means knowing when to let go of the past." Victoria Chen touched her boss's arm lightly. "Mr. Sterling, perhaps we should..." "No, Victoria, these people need to hear this." Sterling stood, addressing the diner like a professor lecturing particularly slow students. This is exactly why rural America is failing, clinging to outdated equipment, outdated methods, outdated thinking. My fund has helped modernize dozens of communities. We bring investment, development, progress. Sam's granddaughter Emma, home from Iowa State for spring break, had entered the diner just in time to hear Sterling's speech. At 20, she had her grandfather's steady blue eyes, but none of his patience. She opened her mouth to respond, but Sam caught her eye and shook his head slightly. "Progress is fine," Sam replied, turning back to his coffee. "But wisdom is knowing the difference between what should be preserved and what should be replaced. That truck's got more useful life in her than half the vehicles on your Manhattan streets." Sterling laughed, a sharp sound like breaking glass. "Useful for what? Scrap metal?" His entourage chuckled dutifully. "Tell you what, old-timer, when that truck does something my Maybach can't, I'll personally fund its restoration." The universe, as it often does when presented with such hubris, chose that moment to demonstrate its sense of humor. Agent Marcus Rodriguez burst through the diner door, his usually composed demeanor replaced with urgency. "We need help," he announced to the room. "The presidential motorcade is stuck on County Road 47. The rain last night turned the construction zone into a mud pit. We need every available vehicle with four-wheel drive and towing capacity." Sterling straightened his tie, a smile playing at his lips. "Well, my Maybach has all-wheel drive. I'm sure it can handle a little mud." He strode toward the door, gesturing for his entourage to follow. "Time to show these locals how it's done." Sam didn't move from his stool, but his eyes met Rodriguez's. "How bad is it?" "Bad," the agent admitted. "The beast is axle deep. The support vehicles are either stuck behind it or can't get enough traction to pull it out. The president has an event in Des Moines in 3 hours." "County Road 47 near the Miller Farm turnoff?" Sam asked. "That's right." Sam nodded, draining his coffee. "That's where they diverted traffic for the bridge work. Graded it wrong last month. Holds water like a swimming pool after heavy rain." He stood, fishing Old Belle's keys from his pocket. "Emma, grab the tow chains from behind the seat, the heavy ones." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sterling was already at the door. "Please," he scoffed, "that relic will just get stuck too. Watch and learn." He swept out, followed by his team. The scene at County Road 47 resembled a disaster movie. The presidential limousine, all 7 tons of armored steel and bulletproof glass, sat imprisoned in thick Iowa mud. Secret Service vehicles lined the road like beached whales, their spinning tires only digging them deeper. Local sheriff's deputies had set up a perimeter, keeping curious onlookers at bay. President Catherine Walsh stood beside her stuck limousine, her shoes caked in mud, trying to maintain dignity while discussing options with her chief of staff. The sight of the leader of the free world stranded in an Iowa mud pit would have been comical if not for the security implications and scheduling nightmare it presented. Sterling's Mercedes Maybach approached the scene like a show horse entering a rodeo. Its pristine silver paint gleamed incongruously against the muddy backdrop. Sterling emerged, surveying the situation with the confidence of someone who had never encountered a problem money couldn't solve. "Step aside," he called to the gathered agents and staff. "Let me show you how modern engineering handles a little mud." He directed his driver to position the Maybach in front of the presidential limo. Victoria Chen produced designer towels to protect the Mercedes tow points as they attached a pristine white tow strap. The Maybach's engine purred as the driver engaged the all-wheel drive system. What followed would later be described by witnesses as the most expensive mistake in Millbrook history. The Maybach's sophisticated traction control system, designed for snow-covered alpine roads and rain-slicked Highways interpreted the mud's consistency as ice. Its computers made thousands of calculations per second, all of them wrong for Iowa clay. The wheels spun with technological precision, achieving nothing but a gradual descent into the muck. Within minutes, Sterling's pride and joy sat as helplessly stuck as the vehicles it had attempted to rescue. The executive emerged from the car, his Italian shoes immediately sinking ankle-deep in mud. His face, usually controlled and confident, showed the first cracks of genuine panic. The rumble of Old Belle's engine announced Sam's arrival before the truck came into view. The Ford crested the hill like a battle-scarred veteran answering one final call to duty. Mud caked its wheel wells from countless similar rescues, and its engine note carried the wisdom of proper gearing and mechanical simplicity. Sam parked on solid ground, well back from the mud pit. He climbed out slowly, surveying the scene with the practiced eye of someone who had pulled farming equipment out of similar situations every spring for 50 years. Emma followed, already uncoiling the heavy chains. President Walsh watched with interest as the elderly farmer walked the perimeter of the mud zone, occasionally kneeling to test the ground's firmness. Unlike Sterling's hurried approach, Sam took his time, decades of experience guiding his assessment. "Ma'am," Sam addressed the president directly, causing several Secret Service agents to tense. "With your permission, I believe I can get you out of here. But I'll need everyone to follow my directions exactly." Agent Rodriguez stepped forward. "Sir, I appreciate the offer, but this is a specialized vehicle with 7 tons, armored plating, run-flat tires, and a low center of gravity that makes it sink like a stone in mud." Sam interrupted gently. "I've pulled out combines heavier than this. The principle's the same. It's all about angle of approach and weight distribution." President Walsh studied the farmer's weathered face, then glanced at her mud-covered motorcade and Sterling's stranded Mercedes. "Agent Rodriguez, I think we should listen to Mr. Whitfield, ma'am." "Sam Whitfield." "Mr. Whitfield, what do you need?" Sam outlined his plan with the clarity of someone who had performed similar rescues countless times. He would use Old Belle not to pull the limo directly, but as an anchor point for a block and tackle system that would multiply the truck's pulling power. They would lay wooden planks from a nearby fence row to create a temporary road surface and use Sterling's stuck Maybach against Sterling's vocal protests as a secondary anchor point. The next hour became a lesson in practical physics and rural engineering. Sam directed agents and local volunteers with quiet authority, positioning vehicles, setting up pulleys, and calculating angles. Emma handled the chains with inherited expertise, while Sterling stood helplessly by, his $1,000 shoes ruined, watching a farmer accomplish what his wealth and technology couldn't. The system Sam created was elegantly simple, the kind of solution that comes from understanding principles rather than relying on gadgets. Old Belle's engine strained, but held steady, her worn tires gripping the solid ground Sam had carefully chosen. Inch by inch, the presidential limousine emerged from its muddy prison. As the beast finally rolled onto solid ground, a cheer went up from the assembled crowd. President Walsh personally shook Sam's grease-stained hand, cameras capturing the moment that would lead every newscast that evening. But for Sam, the real satisfaction came from the look on Sterling's face, a mixture of disbelief, humiliation, and the dawning realization that he had fundamentally misjudged both the truck and its owner. The aftermath unfolded quickly. Sterling's team worked to extract the Maybach, now needing the services of a local towing company with, ironically, a fleet of well-used pickup trucks. The president made her Des Moines event with minutes to spare, but not before inviting Sam to a private conversation in her cleaned-up limousine. What they discussed remained private, but within weeks, President Walsh announced a new rural infrastructure initiative called the Whitfield Plan, focusing on practical, locally informed solutions rather than one-size-fits-all federal programs. The plan emphasized the importance of preserving institutional knowledge and supporting equipment that, while old, remained functionally superior to newer alternatives in specific conditions. Sterling's humiliation made national news, becoming a cautionary tale about urban arrogance and the importance of respecting local expertise. His development plans for Millbrook quietly disappeared, though Victoria Chen later sent Sam a handwritten note of apology and a check for Old Belle's restoration, which Sam donated to the local FFA chapter. As for Old Belle, she continued her faithful service, her story spreading far beyond Iowa. Automotive journalists descended on Millbrook to photograph the truck that saved the president, and Ford's marketing department made several offers to purchase her for their museum, all politely declined. 6 months later, at the Millbrook County Fair, Sterling made an unexpected appearance. He arrived not in a luxury car, but in a rented pickup truck, dressed in jeans and work boots that actually showed signs of use. He found Sam in the agricultural pavilion, standing beside Emma's blue ribbon-winning sustainable farming display. "Mr. Whitfield," Sterling began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "I owe you more than an apology. I owe you a thank you." Sam turned, eyebrows raised. "That's so. After what happened, I did some thinking, some real thinking, for maybe the first time in my career." Sterling's hands fidgeted with his new truck keys. "I realized I'd been so focused on financial engineering that I'd forgotten about actual engineering, about practical knowledge, about wisdom." The word seemed to cost him something to say. Sam waited, saying nothing. "I've restructured my fund," Sterling continued. "We're now focusing on what we call heritage technology, supporting and modernizing equipment and methods that have proven their worth over time rather than replacing them wholesale. We're working with farmers to upgrade their existing machinery rather than pushing them to buy new. It's actually more profitable and certainly more sustainable." Sam nodded, slowly. "Sounds like progress." "It is," Sterling agreed. "Real progress. The kind that builds on what works instead of discarding it." He hesitated, then added, "I've also enrolled in some courses. Agricultural engineering, soil science, trying to understand what I was so quick to dismiss." "Education's important," Sam said, echoing their first encounter. "But remember, wisdom is knowing what to preserve and what to replace," Sterling finished. "I remember." They shook hands. Two men from different worlds finding common ground in the mud of an Iowa. Spring. As Sterling walked away, Emma moved to stand beside her grandfather. "Think he really learned?" she asked. Sam watched Sterling's retreating figure. "Maybe. Sometimes the best lessons come from the deepest mud." He turned to his granddaughter, pride evident in his weathered features. "Speaking of education, tell me about this new soil remediation project of yours. Heard you might need an old truck to haul equipment." Emma grinned. "Well, I know where to find one that's presidential approved." The story of Old Belle's rescue spread far beyond its immediate impact. In business schools, it became a case study in the dangers of technological overconfidence and the value of experiential knowledge. In engineering programs, professors used it to illustrate the difference between complex and complicated systems. Sometimes the simpler solution is superior. For the people of Millbrook, it reinforced what they'd always known, that worth isn't measured in chrome or computing power, but in reliability and the wisdom to use the right tool for the right job. Tourists still stop by Hank's Diner to see the spot where Sterling dismissed Old Belle, and Hank added a new item to the menu: humble pie, Sterling's special. Sam continued farming, continued driving Old Belle, and continued pulling neighbors out of ditches every spring. But now, when city folks passed through town, they looked at the old trucks and weathered equipment with new eyes, wondering what capabilities might hide beneath the rust, what wisdom might reside in their owners. During her next State of the Union address, President Walsh referenced the incident, saying, "In that Iowa mud pit, I learned that progress isn't about replacing everything old with something new. It's about recognizing the value in what has proven itself over time and having the wisdom to preserve it while moving forward. Sometimes the most advanced solution is the one that simply works." Harrison Sterling, watching from his Manhattan office, now decorated with a small model of a 1978 Ford F-150, nodded in agreement. On his desk sat a framed photo from the Millbrook County Fair, him and Sam Whitfield standing beside Old Belle. Both men smiling, mud still visible on Sterling's designer boots. The inscription read, "To Harrison, remember it's not about the shine, it's about the service. Sam." Years later, when Sam finally passed away at 93, his funeral drew an unexpected crowd. Farmers, certainly, and neighbors, of course, but also engineers, business leaders, and politicians who had heard the story and taken its lesson to heart. Sterling delivered part of the eulogy, his voice steady as he said, "Sam Whitfield taught me that true wealth isn't measured in possessions or portfolios, but in the positive impact we have on our communities. He showed me that wisdom often wears work boots and that sometimes the most valuable assets are the ones that show their age." Old Belle remained in the family, maintained now by Emma, who had returned to Millbrook after completing her doctorate in agricultural engineering. She used the truck in her work, developing sustainable farming practices that combined traditional wisdom with modern innovation, an approach she called the Whitfield method. The truck's odometer had long since rolled over, its exact mileage unknown, but its legacy was measured in different numbers. Thousands of vehicles rescued, countless emergencies answered, one president saved from embarrassment, and one Wall Street executive transformed from skeptic to advocate. In the end, Sam Whitfield's quiet dignity in that diner, his patient response to mockery, and his practical demonstration of true capability had created ripples that spread far beyond that muddy Iowa morning. He had shown that respect, competence, and wisdom transcend superficial measures of worth, and that sometimes the most profound lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. As Emma liked to tell visitors who came to see the famous truck, Grandpa always said that Old Belle wasn't just a vehicle. She was a reminder that true value isn't about what something looks like, but about what it can do when it matters most. And that applies to people just as much as it does to trucks. The old Ford continued to serve, its rust now preserved under a clear coat applied by a classic car restorer who begged for the honor. But Sam had insisted on one condition: the truck must remain in working condition, ready to answer the next call for help. Because that's what tools and people of real value do. They serve, they endure, and they prove their worth not in showrooms, but in service. And on muddy spring days, when the ground softens and vehicles find themselves mired in Iowa clay, locals still say, "Don't call a tow truck, call someone with an old truck. The older and rustier the better." There's wisdom in that rust and capability in those dents. Just ask the president. The morning light filtered through the steam rising from coffee cups as the diner's atmosphere thickened with tension. Sterling's entourage exchanged glances, their designer suits looking increasingly out of place among the worn denim and flannel of Millbrook's working class. The Wall Street executive adjusted his Hermes tie, a gesture that betrayed his growing discomfort with the unexpected pushback from the local farmer. Hank Thompson, the diner's owner, wiped down the counter with deliberate slowness, his jaw working as if chewing on words he wanted to say but wouldn't. His establishment had witnessed 40 years of community conversations, but rarely had the divide between two Americas been so starkly displayed across his worn linoleum floor. Sheriff Betty Hawkins entered through the back door, her timing impeccable, as always. At 55, she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had earned respect through decades of fair dealing rather than demanding it through position. Her presence shifted the room's dynamic subtly but noticeably. "Morning, folks," she nodded to the regulars before her gaze settled on the cluster of suits. "Heard we had some VIP visitors in town." Her tone carried the particular brand of Midwestern politeness that could either welcome or warn, depending on the listener's behavior. Sterling seized the opportunity to redirect the conversation. "Sheriff, perfect timing. We were just discussing the need for modernization in rural communities. Perhaps you could share your perspective on outdated equipment creating safety hazards." He gestured toward the window, where Old Belle waited patiently in the morning sun. Betty's eyes followed his gesture, recognition softening her features. "That truck? Sam's Ford has probably prevented more accidents than any vehicle in the county. Can't count the times it's pulled school buses out of snowdrifts or hauled emergency supplies during storms." She accepted a coffee cup from Hank with a grateful nod. "Sometimes reliability trumps aesthetics, Mr. Sterling, Harrison Sterling." He extended his hand with practiced charm. "Sterling Capital Management. We're exploring investment opportunities in underserved rural markets." The sheriff's handshake was firm, her assessment quick. Underserved. Interesting choice of words. She settled onto a stool 2 seats down. "From Sam, most folks around here would say we're served just fine. What we lack in flash, we make up for in function." Victoria Chen shifted uncomfortably in her seat, recognizing the warning signs of her boss's escalating ego. She'd seen this pattern before, Sterling's inability to read a room when his worldview was challenged. In Manhattan boardrooms, his confidence commanded respect. Here, it was beginning to look like something else entirely. "Function without progress is just stagnation," Sterling countered, his voice taking on the tone he used for quarterly earnings calls. "Take that truck, for example. It's not just about aesthetics, it's about efficiency, safety standards, environmental impact. Modern vehicles have catalytic converters, crumple zones, anti-lock brakes. Also got computers that fail when it's 20 below," interrupted Dale Morrison, a grizzled farmer from the corner booth. "Got sensors that cost more to replace than my first house. Got warranties that expire right when things start breaking." A murmur of agreement rippled through the local crowd. Sterling's assistant began frantically typing notes on her tablet, trying to capture what was quickly becoming a focus group from hell for her boss's rural investment thesis. Emma Whitfield watched the exchange with the keen eye of someone straddling both worlds. Her agricultural economics degree from Iowa State had exposed her to the kind of thinking Sterling represented, but her roots ran deep in Millbrook soil. She recognized the fundamental misunderstanding playing out before her, the collision between abstract financial metrics and lived reality. "Mr. Sterling," she interjected, her voice carrying her generation's directness, "your fund manages, what, $2 billion in assets? You make decisions based on spreadsheets and quarterly projections. My grandfather makes decisions based on 5 generations of accumulated knowledge. Different tools for different jobs." Sterling turned toward her, his expression shifting from condescension to curiosity. Young people were supposed to be allies in his mission to modernize rural America. "And you are?" Emma Whitfield, Sam's granddaughter, also the person who wrote her senior thesis on the false economy of planned obsolescence in agricultural equipment. She stood straighter, channeling her grandfather's quiet confidence. "That truck outside? It's still running because it was built to be repaired, not replaced. Try getting a motherboard for a 2-year-old Tesla in the middle of harvest season." The executives around Sterling glanced at their phones nervously, as if suddenly aware of their device's fragility. Sterling himself paused, recalibrating his approach. He'd underestimated the room's sophistication, mistaking rural for simple. A fair point, he conceded with the smooth pivot of someone used to negotiating. But surely you'll admit that progress requires some letting go of the past. Your generation understands disruption, innovation. My generation also understands sustainability, Emma shot back. Real sustainability. Not the kind you put in annual reports, the kind where you fix things instead of throwing them away, where knowledge passes from hand to hand, not just server to server. Sam remained quiet throughout the exchange, sipping his coffee with the patience of someone who had learned that wisdom often speaks loudest through silence. He caught Betty's eye across the counter, and something passed between them. The wordless communication of people who had known each other since childhood. Agent Rodriguez's second entrance carried even more urgency than his first. The diner door banged open, letting in a gust of cool morning air that scattered napkins and caused Sterling's team to clutch at their papers. The agent's usually impeccable suit showed signs of mud splatter, and his expression had shifted from professional concern to barely contained panic. "The situation has deteriorated," he announced without preamble. "We need every available vehicle now. The advance team tried to lay down gravel, but it's sinking. We've got foreign dignitaries arriving for the Des Moines summit tonight, and the president cannot be late." Sterling straightened his shoulders, seizing what he saw as an opportunity for redemption. "Agent Rodriguez, I assure you my vehicle can handle this. German engineering at its finest. All-wheel drive, adaptive suspension, terrain response system." "Sir," Rodriguez cut him off, "with all due respect, we need vehicles with practical mud experience. The Beast is a specialized piece of equipment. If your car gets stuck attempting extraction, it compounds our problem." "Practical mud experience?" Sterling's laugh carried an edge of disbelief. "We're talking about getting a car unstuck, not. He gestured vaguely, searching for an adequately dismissive comparison. "Not rocket science," Sam supplied helpfully, setting down his empty cup. "You're right, it's harder. Rockets follow predictable physics. Mud's got personality." Betty Hawkins stood, adjusting her utility belt. "Sam's right. Every mudhole's different, depends on clay content, water table, recent weather patterns. Your fancy computers can't read mud the way someone who's lived here 60 years can." Sterling's face flushed. The conversation was spiraling beyond his control, challenging not just his morning plans, but his entire worldview. "This is ridiculous. We're talking about basic traction. My Maybach has more torque than that rust bucket I could dream of." "Torque ain't traction," Dale Morrison called from his booth. "And horsepower ain't know-how." The diner erupted in agreement, decades of accumulated wisdom finding voice against the perceived arrogance of the city dweller. Sterling's team shifted nervously, recognizing the shift in room dynamics, but unsure how to counsel their boss, who had built a career on never backing down. "Fine," Sterling declared, his voice cutting through the chatter. "Let's settle this. My car against his truck. I'll personally guarantee a $100,000 donation to the local school if that relic outperforms my Maybach." The diner fell silent. Even the coffee maker seemed to pause its gurgling. Sam turned slowly on his stool, studying Sterling, with the careful consideration of a farmer evaluating weather patterns. "Not interested in your money," Sam said finally. "But I'll make you a deal. If Old Belle gets the president moving and your car doesn't, you spend 1 week working on my farm, sunup to sundown, learning what actual mud work means." Sterling's team gasped audibly. Victoria Chen's tablet clattered to the counter. The executive himself stood frozen, caught between his publicly declared confidence and the sudden reality of personal stakes. "And if your truck fails?" Sterling managed, his voice slightly strained. Sam shrugged. Then I'll admit you were right about needing to modernize. Might even let you invest in whatever rural improvement scheme you're cooking up." Emma's eyes widened. She knew how much Old Belle meant to her grandfather. It wasn't just a vehicle, it was a rolling testament to his father's memory, his own life's work, and the values he held sacred. For him to even consider such a wager spoke volumes about his confidence, not just in the truck, but in the principles it represented. Sterling extended his hand across the counter. "Deal." The handshake that followed carried more weight than any contract Sterling had signed in his Manhattan office. As their hands met, weathered calluses against manicured smoothness, the diner held its collective breath. They had just witnessed something increasingly rare in modern America, a challenge issued and accepted on honor alone, with stakes that transcended money. Outside, Old Belle's engine ticked softly as it cooled in the morning air, unaware that it was about to become the center of a confrontation between two worldviews, two Americas, and two men whose pride had led them to a muddy crossroads where only one could emerge with dignity intact. The convoy that departed Hank's diner resembled a strange parade. Sterling's silver Maybach led the way, its pristine finish reflecting the morning sun like a mirror. Behind it, Old Belle rumbled along at a steady pace, neither rushing nor dawdling, her rust-spotted panels telling stories of countless seasons. Sheriff Hawkins brought up the rear in her patrol car, officially to manage traffic, but unofficially to witness what was shaping up to be the most interesting morning Millbrook had seen in decades. The 2-mile journey to the stranded motorcade provided Sterling ample opportunity to pontificate through his car's premium sound system, his voice carrying through the open windows to his following team. "You see, Victoria, this is exactly the kind of empirical test rural communities need. Direct comparison between outdated equipment and modern technology. The data will be invaluable for our investment thesis." Victoria Chen, gripping the passenger handle as the Maybach navigated the increasingly rough county road, managed a diplomatic response. "Of course, Mr. Sterling, though perhaps we should consider multiple variables in our analysis. Local conditions, operator experience. Experience is just another word for resistance to change," Sterling interrupted, downshifting aggressively as they approached a particularly rutted section. "Anyone can push a gas pedal. The difference is in the machine." Behind them, Sam drove Old Belle with the unconscious ease of someone operating an extension of himself rather than a separate machine. Emma rode shotgun, her phone recording the journey for what she suspected would become either family legend or cautionary tale. "Grandpa," she ventured carefully, "are you sure about this bet? I mean, Sterling's not wrong about modern technology. Having advantages. Technology's tool," Sam replied, his hands steady on the worn steering wheel. "Good for what it's good for, but wisdom is knowing when to use which tool. That fellow thinks his computer can outthink mud. He's about to learn that nature doesn't read specification sheets." They crested the final hill, and the scene below unfolded like a tableau of modern helplessness. The presidential motorcade stretched along County Road 47 like a funeral procession that had forgotten how to move. The Beast, the massive armored limousine that served as the president's mobile fortress, sat mired in the center of what looked like a brown lake that had suddenly appeared in the middle of Iowa. Secret Service agents swarmed the area, their polished shoes caked with mud, earpieces crackling with frustrated communications. Support vehicles lined both sides of the road, their own attempts at rescue evident in the deep ruts that scarred the shoulder. Local deputies had established a perimeter, keeping back the growing crowd of farmers and townspeople who had arrived. To witness the spectacle, President Catherine Walsh stood on a small patch of dry ground, somehow maintaining her dignity despite the chaos surrounding her. At 58, she projected the calm authority that had carried her through international crises and domestic upheavals. Her mud-spattered shoes and the slight disarray of her usually perfect hair only seemed to humanize her in the eyes of the gathered locals. As Sterling's Maybach approached, Agent Rodriguez hurried forward, relief and skepticism warring on his face. The silver luxury car looked absurdly out of place, like a ballroom dancer who had wandered onto a rugby field. "Mr. Sterling," Rodriguez began, then noticed Old Belle pulling up behind. His expression shifted to something approaching hope. "And Mr. Whitfield, thank you both for coming." Sterling emerged from his car with the confidence of a man about to solve a simple problem with superior resources. His team followed, their tablets and phones at the ready to document their boss's triumph. They had already begun crafting the press release. Sterling Capital CEO rescues presidential motorcade, demonstrates private sector efficiency. Sam's exit from Old Belle was less dramatic, but drew more attention from the gathered locals. Several farmers nodded in recognition, and a murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. They knew that truck, had seen it in action countless times over the decades. President Walsh approached the unlikely pair of would-be rescuers, her security detail forming a protective semicircle. "Gentlemen, I understand you're here to help. The situation is becoming pressing." Sterling stepped forward with practiced charm. "Madam President Harrison Sterling, my firm specializes in solving complex problems with modern solutions. I assure you, my vehicle is equipped with the most advanced—" "Begging your pardon, ma'am," Sam interrupted gently, "but might I take a look at the situation first? Been pulling things out of mud around here since before most of these folks were born." The president's eyes moved between the two men, Sterling in his $1,000 suit and Italian shoes, Sam in his worn work clothes and boots that had seen more mud than most people saw in a lifetime. "By all means, Mr. Whitfield, ma'am. Sam Whitfield." He tipped his weathered cap respectfully. "My granddaughter Emma's studying agricultural engineering at Iowa State. Between us, we might have some ideas." Sterling's jaw tightened at being upstaged, but he maintained his composure. "Of course, assess away. Though I should mention that my vehicle's terrain response system has already analyzed the conditions via satellite data." The contrast in approaches became immediately apparent. Sterling consulted his phone, pulling up topographical data and weather patterns, speaking in terms of coefficient of friction and weight distribution algorithms. Sam walked the perimeter of the mud zone, occasionally kneeling to test the ground's consistency, studying the angle of sunlight on standing water, noting which vegetation grew where. Emma followed her grandfather, taking notes on her phone while translating his observations into engineering terms she knew would carry weight with the assembled officials. "The water table's high here because of the underground spring that feeds Miller's Pond," she explained to a curious Secret Service agent. "The road construction diverted the natural drainage. Grandpa's checking for the firm spots where bedrock's closer to the surface." After 10 minutes of assessment, both men returned to the president. Sterling spoke first, his presentation polished from years of boardroom performances. "The solution is straightforward. My Maybach's intelligent all-wheel drive system can provide the necessary traction. We'll attach the tow strap at the optimal angle, 27 degrees based on the weight distribution, and extract the vehicle using steady acceleration. The car's computers will prevent wheel spin and maintain ideal torque delivery." He produced a tablet showing impressive graphics of force vectors and traction coefficients. Several of the younger agents nodded appreciatively at the high-tech approach. Then it was Sam's turn. He spoke without visual aids, his words carrying the weight of experience rather than electronics. "Ma'am, the mud here's got 3 layers. Top's soup, won't hold nothing. Middle's false bottom, looks solid but gives way under weight. Bottom's clay hardpan about 18 inches down. Your car's sitting right where the hardpan dips, like a bowl holding water." He pointed to seemingly random spots around the stuck limousine. See them tufts of foxtail grass? They only grow where the ground stays firm, even in spring. That's where we can get purchase. But pulling straight won't work. Angle's wrong. We need to go at 45 degrees to the left, then shift to straight once the front wheels hit the gravel base. President Walsh looked between the two men. And your vehicle can handle this, Mr. Whitfield? Old Belle's pulled out tractors twice her weight. Got a low-range transfer case and locked differentials. More important, she's got weight distribution that won't dig in. Your car's heavy, but it ain't stuck deep, just settled wrong. Like a coin in mud. Needs the right angle to pop free. Sterling couldn't contain himself. With all due respect, this is precisely the kind of folksy wisdom that keeps rural America behind. My car has sensors that can detect wheel slip in milliseconds, computers that calculate optimal power delivery. Your computers ever pulled a combine out of a bog? Sam asked mildly. The question hung in the air, its simplicity cutting through Sterling's technological sermon. President Walsh's lips twitched in what might have been suppressed amusement. Very well, she decided. Mr. Sterling, you'll attempt first. Mr. Whitfield, please stand ready as backup. The crowd pressed closer as Sterling directed his team to position the Maybach. Everything about the operation screamed metropolitan efficiency, laser levels. To ensure optimal angle, tensiometers to measure strap stress, even a drone to provide aerial footage for real-time analysis. Beginning extraction sequence, Sterling announced with the gravity of a moon launch. He slid into the driver's seat, his team calling out readings from their various devices. The Maybach's engine purred to life, its sound system automatically muting as the stability control engaged. Sterling pressed the accelerator with scientific precision, watching the dashboard display as the all-wheel drive system distributed power according to its programming. For a moment it seemed to work. The toe strap tensioned, the silver car squatted slightly as torque built. The presidential limousine shifted perhaps an inch. Then physics, particularly the physics of Iowa mud, asserted itself. The Maybach's computers, programmed for Autobahn and Alpine passes, interpreted the surface inconsistency as ice. The traction control began cycling the brakes, reducing power to prevent wheel spin. But mud doesn't behave like ice. As the wheels sought grip, they merely polished the slick surface, creating a frictionless interface. Sterling pressed harder on the accelerator, overriding the conservative programming. The engine note rose from purr to growl. The wheels began to spin faster, and with each revolution, the inevitable occurred. The Maybach's rear end began to slide left, its sophisticated sensors unable to compensate for the uneven surface tension of mixed mud and clay, Sterling corrected. But the computer's response time, calibrated for pavement, lagged behind the mud's unpredictable behavior. Adjusting traction parameters, Victoria Chen called out, frantically tapping her tablet as if she could reprogram. Physics through sheer determination. But mud has its own logic, and it cares nothing for German engineering or Silicon Valley optimization. The Maybach's wheels found a soft spot, and with the inevitability of gravity, the rear passenger side began to sink. "Abort! Abort!" Sterling shouted, but momentum and mud had formed their own alliance. With a sound somewhere between a squelch and a sigh, the silver Maybach settled into the muck at an undignified angle, its clearance lights now below the mud line. The silence that followed was profound. Even the birds seemed to pause their morning songs to appreciate the moment. Sterling sat frozen in the driver's seat, his knuckles white on the leather-wrapped steering wheel, watching his dashboard display flash warnings about everything from tire pressure to parking sensor malfunction. A single clod of mud chose that moment to release from the Maybach's wheel well, dropping onto Sterling's Italian leather shoe with comic precision. Somewhere in the crowd, a teenager failed to suppress a snort of laughter. President Walsh maintained her diplomatic composure, though her chief of staff appeared to be having a coughing fit that looked suspiciously like hidden laughter. Agent. Rodriguez stepped forward, his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Whitfield," he said formally, "would you care to attempt?" Sam nodded, already moving toward Old Belle. "Emma, get the heavy chains. We'll need the double setup." He turned to the president. "Ma'am, this might take a few minutes to rig properly. Good things take time." As grandfather and granddaughter worked with practiced efficiency, Sterling emerged from his stranded vehicle, his face a study in disbelief. His team rushed forward with towels and explanations, but the damage to more than just his car was already done. "The surface composition must have changed," one assistant offered desperately. "The satellite data showed—" "The satellite data," Sam interrupted kindly as he passed with a heavy chain. "Don't know that old man Miller used to dump his field stones here every spring for 50 years. Changes the base structure something fierce." Sterling watched helplessly as Sam and Emma set up their extraction rig. Unlike his high-tech approach, their method seemed almost primitive. Heavy chains, wooden blocks, and careful attention to angles that had nothing to do with computers and everything to do with understanding the land. Old Belle backed into position with a rumble that spoke of decades of similar operations. Sam tested the ground with his boot before placing each wheel, making minute adjustments that his granddaughter documented with interest. "See how he's reading the mud consistency?" Emma explained to a curious Secret Service agent. "The way it cracks tells you about the moisture content. The color variations show where clay meets loam. Grandpa's got 50 years of data in his head that no satellite can match." They attached the chains, not to one point, but to 3 separate anchors on the presidential limousine, distributing the load in a pattern that looked random, but followed the invisible geography of solid ground beneath the mud. "Ready when you are, ma'am," Sam called to the president. "Proceed, Mr. Whitfield." Sam climbed into Old Belle's cab with the measured movements of someone who knew rushing helped nothing. The truck's engine note dropped to a low rumble as he engaged the low-range gearing. Unlike Sterling's dramatic acceleration, Sam's approach was almost meditative. The chains tensioned slowly, creaking as they took up the strain. Old Belle's tires, worn to a specific pattern by decades of similar work, found purchase where the Maybach's performance treads had failed. The truck didn't fight the mud so much as negotiate with it, its weight shifting subtly as Sam worked the clutch and throttle with the precision of a surgeon. The presidential limousine creaked, settled, then began to move. Not with a dramatic lurch, but with the steady inevitability of a ship leaving harbor. Inch by inch, foot by foot, the massive armored vehicle emerged from its muddy prison. The crowd's appreciation built from murmurs to cheers as the beast's front wheels found gravel, then pavement. What Sterling's technology had failed to achieve in 10 minutes of wheel-spinning drama, Sam accomplished in 3 minutes of patient, knowledgeable effort. As the presidential limousine rolled onto solid ground, Agent Rodriguez coordinated its inspection while Sam and Emma began coiling their chains. The contrast between the 2 rescue attempts couldn't have been more stark. Sterling's Maybach still sat at its undignified angle, a monument to theoretical knowledge meeting practical reality, while Old Belle idled contentedly, mud-splattered but victorious. President Walsh approached Sam personally. "Mr. Whitfield, I believe the nation owes you a debt of gratitude." Sam touched his cap again. "Just doing what needed doing, ma'am. Though if I might make a suggestion, please, might want to have a word with whoever planned your route. County engineers been trying to get that section properly graded for 2 years. Federal red tape's been holding it up." The president's eyes sharpened with interest. "Is that so? Perhaps you could brief my infrastructure advisor. It seems we might have something to learn about local knowledge and federal processes." Meanwhile, Sterling stood beside his stranded vehicle, his $1,000 shoes ruined, his pride thoroughly deflated. Victoria Chen approached cautiously with his phone, showing incoming calls from investors who had somehow already heard about the morning's events. The social media coverage is extensive, she reported reluctantly. The hashtag #MudVsMaybach is trending. Sterling closed his eyes briefly, recognizing that his carefully cultivated image as a rural investment expert had just suffered a possibly fatal blow. But as he watched Sam Whitfield explaining mud dynamics to the President of the United States, something shifted in his perspective. The bet. He had made a public wager, and the results were undeniable. A week on Whitfield's, farm awaited him, sun up to sundown, learning what actual mud work meant. For the first time in his professional life, Harrison Sterling III faced a challenge that couldn't be solved with money, influence, or technology. As if reading his thoughts, Sam appeared at his elbow. "Don't worry too much about your car. Local. Boys will have her out in no time. As for our bet," he extended a calloused hand, "I've got a spare pair of boots that might fit. Hope you don't mind starting tomorrow. Got fence to mend in the north pasture." Sterling looked at the offered hand, then at his own manicured fingers. Around them, the morning sun climbed higher, promising another day of Iowa spring, mud, work, and lessons as old as the soil itself. He reached out and shook Sam's hand, not realizing that this simple gesture would mark the beginning of his real education. The crowd began to disperse as the presidential motorcade prepared to continue its journey. Emma captured the moment on her phone, her grandfather and the Wall Street executive, shaking hands beside a stranded Maybach and a mud-splattered Ford, while the President of the United States looked on with approval. "Think he'll actually show up tomorrow?" she asked her grandfather as they walked back to Old Belle. Sam glanced back at Sterling, who was now listening intently as a local tow truck operator explained extraction techniques. Man shook on it. Besides, sometimes the best lessons come from the deepest mud. As they drove away, Old Belle's radio crackled with the local news station, already reporting the morning's events. But Sam just smiled and patted the truck's dashboard, knowing that some truths didn't need broadcasting, they just needed demonstrating, one muddy morning at a time. The rest of that day in Millbrook would be remembered as the moment when two Americas, rural and urban, practical and theoretical, traditional and modern, met in a muddy field and discovered they had more to learn from each other than either had imagined. And it all started with an old truck, a humble farmer, and the wisdom to know that sometimes the newest solution to a problem is the oldest one. The dawn broke grey and misty over Whitfield Farm, the kind of morning that promised either rain or revelation. Harrison Sterling III stood at the edge of Sam's gravel driveway, his newly purchased work boots looking absurdly pristine against the well-worn ground. He had arrived at 5:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the agreed time, partly from ingrained punctuality and partly from a nervous energy that had kept him awake most of the night. Sterling had dressed in what he assumed farmers wore, designer jeans and a plaid shirt from a boutique that specialized in authentic workwear for executives wanting to appear relatable. The price tag of his outfit could have fed a family. For a month, though this irony was lost on him as he checked his phone for the 5th time, surprised to find no signal. The farmhouse door creaked open, and Sam emerged carrying 2 steaming mugs. He took in Sterling's appearance with a glance that somehow conveyed both amusement and patience. "Coffee's black," Sam offered, extending a mug. "Hope that suits." Sterling accepted gratefully, wrapping his hands around the warm ceramic. "Thank you. I wasn't sure what to wear. The store assured me this was appropriate for farm work." Sam's weathered face crinkled into what might have been a smile. "Reckon those clothes will learn their purpose soon enough. Come on, day's wasting." They walked toward the barn, Sterling's new boots making awkward sounds on the gravel while Sam moved. with the silent efficiency of someone who knew exactly where each foot should fall. The morning air carried the scent of hay, manure, and something Sterling couldn't identify but would later learn was the particular smell of soil awakening to spring. "First thing you need to understand," Sam began, pausing at the barn door, "is that farming ain't about conquering nature. It's about working with it. Everything has its rhythm, the seasons, the soil, the animals. Your job is to learn that rhythm, not try to impose your own." Inside the barn, Sterling blinked as his eyes adjusted to the dim light. The space was nothing like the pristine facilities he'd seen in agricultural investment prospectuses. Tools hung from worn pegs, their handles smooth from decades of use. Bales of hay stacked to the rafters created a maze of golden walls. In one corner, Old Belle rested, her presence somehow both mechanical and organic in this setting. "We'll start with feeding," Sam announced, handing Sterling a pitchfork. "Cattle don't care about market hours or quarterly reports. They eat when they need to eat." The pitchfork felt foreign in Sterling's hands, its weight and balance unlike anything in his Manhattan life. He watched as Sam demonstrated the proper technique for moving hay, a fluid motion that seemed simple until Sterling attempted to replicate it. His first forkful scattered more hay on himself than in the wheelbarrow. "Like this," Sam corrected gently, adjusting Sterling's grip. "Let the tool do the work. Fighting it just wears you out." For the next hour, they worked in relative silence, Sterling gradually finding a rhythm, though his shoulders began to protest after the first 20 minutes. Sweat darkened his designer shirt, and pieces of hay found their way into places he didn't know hay could reach. As they moved to the cattle pen, Sterling attempted conversation. "I've read about automated feeding systems. Wouldn't that be more efficient?" Sam paused, leaning on his pitchfork. "Efficient for what? See that? Brown cow, third from the left? She's favoring her right rear leg. Noticed it when she came to feed. Might be a stone bruise, might be something worse. Automated system wouldn't catch that." Sterling looked at the cow, seeing nothing unusual. "How can you tell?" "Same way. You probably read market trends. Pattern recognition. That cow's been part of this herd for 6 years. I know how she usually moves, how she approaches the feed trough. Small changes tell big stories if you're paying attention." They continued. The morning chores, checking water troughs, inspecting fences, monitoring the health of various animals. Each task revealed layers of complexity Sterling had never considered. The placement of salt licks wasn't random, but calculated based on grazing patterns. The angle of fence posts accounted for prevailing winds and soil composition. By mid-morning, Sterling's hands bore their first blisters, and his back ached in ways his gym routine had never achieved. They took a break near a small pond where cattle gathered to drink. "In my world," Sterling said, gingerly lowering himself onto a fallen log, "we optimize everything. Time, resources, returns. Every decision backed by data." Sam settled beside him, somehow looking no more tired than when they'd started. "Nothing wrong with data. Use it myself. But data tells you what happened, not always why, or what might happen next if you don't understand the why." A great blue heron landed at the pond's edge, its movements deliberate and graceful. Sterling watched it fish, struck by the patience it displayed. "That bird's been coming here every spring for 8 years, Sam noted. "Means the pond's healthy, fish population's stable. Some developer wanted to drain this wetland once, said it was wasted space. What stopped them? Economics, ironically enough. This pond feeds the aquifer that irrigates the South 40. Acres, drain it, and you need expensive irrigation systems. Nature's infrastructure is usually cheaper than man-made alternatives, if you bother to understand it." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Emma in a battered pickup truck. She waved as she parked, then approached with a knowing grin at Sterling's disheveled appearance. "Brought lunch," she announced, lifting a cooler from the truck. Bed. Figured you might need sustenance after your first morning of real work. They ate sandwiches and homemade pie while sitting on hay bales, Sterling discovering that food tasted different after physical labor. The simple meal seemed more satisfying than any Michelin-starred restaurant he'd frequented. "So, Mr. Sterling," Emma said between bites, "what's the verdict so far?" Sterling considered the question seriously. "It's humbling. Every task I've done this morning has layers I never imagined. And I'm starting to understand why Sam knew things about that mud yesterday that my technology couldn't detect." Sam nodded approvingly. "Technology's a tool, like any other. Useful when used right, dangerous when relied on blindly, same as that pitchfork." The afternoon brought new challenges. They worked on repairing a section of fence damaged by winter storms. Sterling learned that fence building was as much art as engineering, accounting for soil types, animal behavior, weather patterns, and property lines that followed natural landmarks rather than surveyed coordinates. "Your great-grandfather and mine set this boundary," Sam explained as they stretched wire. "Followed the ridge where water naturally divides. Lawyers wanted straight lines on a map. Old-timers knew better, work with the land's natural features, not against them." Sterling's phone, forgotten in his pocket, buzzed with incoming messages as they briefly entered a zone with reception. He glanced at it to see dozens of notifications, market updates, meeting requests, investor concerns about yesterday's Bay incident. The contrast between those urgent digital demands and the patient rhythm of farm work was jarring. "Important?" Sam asked, noticing the phone. "They think so," Sterling replied, surprising himself by putting the device away without responding. "It's strange. All morning I've been disconnected from what I thought was critical information, yet I feel more present than I have in years." "Present's a good word for it," Sam agreed. "Can't farm in the future or the past. Crops grow now, animals need tending now, soil speaks to you now if you're listening." As the afternoon wore on, they encountered a calf tangled in old barbed wire near the property's edge. Sterling watched as Sam approached the frightened animal with remarkable gentleness, speaking in low tones while carefully working to free it. "Hold her head steady," Sam instructed. "Don't fight her fear, work with it." Sterling found himself face to face with the calf, its large brown eyes reflecting his own uncertainty. He mimicked Sam's soothing tone, surprised when the animal seemed to respond, its struggling easing as they worked together to remove the wire. "There's a metaphor in this," Sterling observed as they watched the freed calf rejoin its mother. "About understanding what really binds us versus what we think restrains us." Sam glanced at him with newfound respect. "Maybe you're learning something after all." The day's final task involved preparing equipment for the next morning's planting. In the equipment shed, Sterling encountered an array of machinery spanning decades. Modern GPS-guided tractors sat alongside implements that looked positively antique. "Why keep the old equipment?" Sterling asked, running his hand along a cultivator that had to be 50 years old. "Because sometimes old solutions work better for specific problems," Sam explained. "That cultivator handles wet soil better than the new ones. Less soil compaction. My grandfather designed it specifically for our clay content. But surely modern engineering assumes standardized conditions," Sam interrupted gently. "Every farm's different. Every field's got its own personality. Mass-produced solutions work for mass-produced problems. Real farming ain't mass-produced." As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, they returned to the farmhouse. Sterling's designer clothes were ruined, his hands blistered and dirty, his muscles aching in ways he'd never experienced. Yet he felt something unexpected. a sense of accomplishment divorced from profit margins or market performance. "Same time tomorrow?" Sam asked as Sterling prepared to leave. "Yes," Sterling answered without hesitation, then added, "Sam, I owe you an apology, not just for yesterday, but for years of misunderstanding what rural America really means." Sam waved off the apology. "Don't need sorry, just need understanding. World's big enough for both our kinds of knowing." Driving back to his hotel, Sterling reflected on the day's lessons. His Maybach remained at the repair shop, so he'd rented a modest sedan, a choice that would have mortified him 24 hours ago, but now seemed appropriately humble. The hotel clerk did a double take when Sterling entered the lobby, his appearance a far cry from the polished executive who'd checked in 2 days ago. In his suite, he drew a bath, watching as the water turned brown from the day's accumulation of honest dirt. His phone showed 47 missed calls and over 100 emails. The financial press had picked up the story of his muddy defeat, with headlines ranging from playful to vicious. His investors demanded explanations. His board questioned his judgment. But as Sterling sank into the hot water, feeling muscles he'd forgotten existed, he realized something profound had shifted. For years, he'd viewed rural America as a problem to be solved, an inefficiency to be optimized. Now he began to see it as a repository of knowledge that spreadsheets couldn't capture, wisdom that algorithms couldn't replicate. He opened his laptop and began composing an email to his board. "Colleagues, the events of the past 2 days have provided an education more valuable than any market analysis. I'm extending my stay in Millbrook to complete a commitment that will fundamentally reshape our investment approach. Rural America doesn't need our solutions imposed from above. It needs partnership, understanding, and respect for accumulated wisdom. I will present a revised strategy upon my return. In the meantime, I ask for your patience as I learn lessons that no MBA program could teach. Regards, Harrison." After sending the message, Sterling turned off his phone and fell into the deepest sleep he'd experienced in years. His dreams filled not with stock tickers and profit charts, but with the rhythm of seasons and the patient wisdom of soil. The next morning arrived with the reliability of farm life itself. Sterling showed up at the Whitfield farm in clothes borrowed from Sam's son, practical workwear that had seen actual work. His designer outfit from the previous day lay in the hotel trash, a small sacrifice to his evolving understanding. "Ready for day 2? Sam asked, noting the change in attire with approval. "More ready than I was yesterday," Sterling admitted, "though I suspect I still have more to learn than I can imagine." Sam smiled, handing him the morning's coffee. "Suspecting you have more to learn is the beginning of wisdom. Come on, we've got seeds to plant, and the earth waits for no man's education." As they walked toward the fields where Old Belle waited to pull the planting equipment, Sterling felt something he hadn't experienced since childhood. The joy of being a student in a classroom without walls, where every lesson connected to something real, and where success wasn't measured in dollars, but in the green shoots that would emerge from soil tended with understanding. The state political machine had descended on Millbrook by day 3 of Sterling's farm education. News vans lined Main Street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like mechanical sunflowers. The story of the Wall Street executive working dawn to dusk on a small Iowa farm had evolved from local curiosity to national interest. Sterling, unaware of the media frenzy, was knee-deep in a drainage ditch when the first news helicopter appeared overhead. He and Sam were clearing debris from a culvert that had been problematic since the Army Corps of Engineers had improved the local watershed management system 5 years ago. "Federal solution to a local problem," Sam explained, pointing to where the engineered channel disrupted the natural flow pattern. They spent $2 million to create a flooding issue we never had before. The helicopter's presence drew Sterling's attention. Looks like our privacy is over, he observed, wiping muddy hands on his borrowed overalls. Sam squinted upward. Price of doing something unexpected, I suppose, though I can't figure why folks find a man learning honest work so newsworthy. Emma arrived in her pickup, her expression a mix of amusement and concern. Grandpa, Sterling, you might want to see this. She held up her tablet, showing trending social media feeds. Mud to Wisdom and Shasham Wall Street farmhand had become viral phenomena. The lead story on several national news sites featured aerial footage of Sterling and Sam working together, with headlines like "Humbled Financier Learns America's Heartland Values," and "From Maybach to Manure, a CEO's Rural Awakening." Sterling's initial reaction was to reach for his phone, to call his PR team, to manage the narrative, but his hand stopped halfway to his pocket. You know what? Let them watch. Maybe someone will learn something. By lunchtime, reporters had gathered at the farm's entrance, kept at bay by Sheriff Hawkins and her deputies. The sheriff approached the house where Sam, Sterling, and Emma were eating sandwiches on the porch. "Sam, they're asking for interviews. Getting pushier by the minute," Betty reported. "Your call on how to handle it." Sam looked to Sterling. "You're the one they're interested in, though I can't say I understand the fuss." Sterling considered the situation. 3 days ago, he would have crafted a careful media strategy, spinning the situation to protect his image. Now, covered in honest dirt with blisters on his hands, he felt differently. "Tell them they can observe from the road, but no interviews until the week is complete. This isn't a photo op, it's an education." The sheriff nodded approvingly. "I'll relay that, though you should know the president's office called. She's following the story with interest." As Betty departed, Emma showed them her university's agricultural forum, where professors and students were debating the implications of Sterling's experience. "They're calling it a case study in experiential learning versus theoretical knowledge," she explained. "My advisor wants to know if you'd both speak to our sustainable agriculture class when this is over." The afternoon's work involved soil testing in preparation for crop rotation. Sterling learned to identify soil composition by texture, smell, and even taste, a far cry from reviewing geological surveys in boardrooms. "Different crops take different nutrients, leave different residues," Sam explained, crumbling earth between his fingers. "Corn depletes nitrogen, soybeans fix it. Rotation isn't just tradition, it's soil chemistry in action." Sterling found himself taking notes in a small notebook Sam had provided, his handwriting cramped from unused muscles, but his mind engaged in ways no PowerPoint presentation had ever achieved. "It's like portfolio diversification," he mused, "but with actual growth instead of just numbers." "Now you're getting it," Sam encouraged. "Everything in farming has parallels to what you know. Just have to look past the surface." As they worked, Sterling began to notice things his previous self would have missed. The way birds followed their tractor, feeding on insects turned up by the plow. The subtle changes in soil color that indicated drainage patterns. The relationship between wind direction and plant health. The sunset that evening found them repairing an irrigation pump that had served the farm since the 1960s. Sterling, who had advocated for complete technological overhauls in countless board meetings, found himself appreciating the elegance of simple, maintainable design. "Could replace this with a computer-controlled system," he noted. "But then you'd need specialized technicians for repairs, software updates, vulnerability to power outages." "Exactly," Sam agreed. "Sometimes progress means keeping what works while improving what doesn't, not throwing everything out for the sake of newness." That night, Sterling's hotel voicemail was full of messages from his New York life. Investors worried about his absence, competitors sensing weakness, media consultants offering crisis management. He listened to each message, then deleted. them all without response. Instead, he spent the evening writing in his notebook, documenting not financial insights, but agricultural wisdom. Lessons about patience, about working with natural systems rather than against them, about the false economy of solutions that created new problems. Day 4 brought unexpected visitors. A delegation from the state's Economic Development Council arrived at the farm, hoping to capitalize on the positive publicity. They found Sterling and Sam working on the old combine harvester, preparing it for the upcoming season. "Mr. Sterling," the lead official began, smoothing his suit despite the dusty conditions, "we'd like to discuss how your experience here might inform state policy on rural development." Sterling straightened from the engine compartment, grease on his hands and face. "I'm not ready to inform anyone about anything yet. I'm still learning," the official persisted. "But surely your insights on modernizing rural infrastructure—" "My insight," Sterling interrupted, "is that I had no insights. I had assumptions. There's a difference." He gestured to the combine. "This machine is 40 years old and still works because it was built to be repaired, not replaced. Maybe that's the infrastructure lesson we need." After the delegation departed, somewhat deflated, Sam clapped Sterling on the shoulder. "You're starting to sound like a farmer. Is that good or bad? Depends on whether you're trying to grow something real or just harvest profits." The question hung in the air as they returned to work, both men understanding that Sterling's education was approaching a crucial transformation point. Day 5 coincided with the arrival of Sterling's board of directors. They had flown in on the company jet, a group of men and women more comfortable in boardrooms than barnyards. They found their CEO helping birth a calf in the pre-dawn hours, his expensive watch replaced by a practical Timex, his manicured hands bloody but steady. "Harrison," the board chairman began, then stopped, unsure how to address the scene before him. "We need to discuss the company's direction." "Give me 10 minutes, Sterling replied calmly. "This calf's breech needs turning." The board members watched in stunned silence as Sterling, guided by Sam, helped deliver the calf safely. The parallel to corporate crisis management was not lost on anyone, though the stakes here were life itself rather than stock prices. Later, cleaned up but still in work clothes, Sterling met with his board in Sam's kitchen. Mary Whitfield, Sam's wife, served coffee and homemade cinnamon rolls, treating the powerful executives with the same hospitality she'd show any visitor. "I'll keep this simple," Sterling began. "Everything I thought I knew about rural investment was wrong. We've been trying to impose urban solutions on rural challenges without understanding the fundamental differences in how these systems work." He pulled out his notebook, now filled with observations and insights. Sustainable agriculture isn't just about new technology. It's about understanding existing systems, natural cycles, generational knowledge. Our investment strategy needs to support what works while carefully introducing improvements that complement rather than replace. The board listened, some skeptical, others intrigued. The chairman finally spoke. "You're suggesting we completely revise our rural development portfolio." "I'm suggesting we actually learn about rural development before we presume to fund it," Sterling clarified. "And I'm suggesting we start by hiring people like Sam as consultants, people who understand the reality, not just the theory." The meeting lasted 3 hours. By its end, Sterling had outlined a new approach that would revolutionize their firm's rural investments. It emphasized patient capital over quick returns, local knowledge over standardized solutions, and partnerships with communities rather than takeovers. Day 6 was marked by a spring storm that threatened the newly planted fields. Sterling learned that farming meant working with weather, not just checking forecasts. He and Sam spent the day reinforcing drainage systems and protecting vulnerable crops. Can't control the rain, Sam observed as they worked in the downpour, but you can prepare for it. Another thing, spreadsheets don't teach. The storm also brought a power outage that shut down the county's computerized systems. While modern farms struggled with electronic equipment failures, Sam's operation continued smoothly with manual, backups, and time-tested methods. Resilience isn't about having the newest technology, Sterling noted, helping hand crank a fuel pump. It's about having systems that work when technology fails. That evening, as the storm cleared, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the rain-washed sky. Sterling's transformation was nearly complete, not from executive to farmer, but from someone who saw rural America as a problem to someone who recognized it as a solution. The final day arrived with the clarity that follows storms. Sterling rose before dawn without an alarm, his body now attuned to farm rhythms. He found Sam already in the barn, tending to the morning chores with the same patience he'd shown all week. "Last day," Sam noted as Sterling joined him. "What have you learned?" Sterling picked up a pitchfork, the same tool he'd fumbled with on the first day, and began mucking stalls with practiced efficiency. "I've learned that wisdom isn't about knowing everything. It's about understanding how things connect. The soil, the weather, the animals, the community. It's all one system." They worked in companionable silence until breakfast, where Mary had prepared a farewell meal. Emma joined them, along with several neighbors who had watched the week's events with interest. "So what happens now?" Emma asked as they ate. "Back to New York and business as usual?" Sterling shook his head. "Back to New York, yes, but nothing will be as usual." He turned to Sam. "I'd like to propose something. A partnership between my firm and operations like yours. Not to change what you do, but to help preserve it while making it economically sustainable for the next generation." Sam considered this. "What kind of partnership?" "The kind where we listen first and advise second, where we bring financial resources to support your knowledge, not replace it. Where investment means strengthening communities, not disrupting them." The conversation continued through breakfast, laying groundwork for what would become the Whitfield Sterling Rural Preservation Initiative, a program that would eventually transform agricultural investment across the country. That afternoon, a crowd gathered to witness Sterling's departure. The media had been allowed in for this final moment, their cameras capturing the handshake between the weathered farmer and the transformed executive. "Thank you," Sterling said simply, gripping Sam's hand, "for teaching me what no business school could." "Thank you for being willing to learn," Sam replied. "Takes a big man to admit what he doesn't know." As Sterling drove away in his rental car, his Maybach still under repair and somehow no longer important to him, he saw Old Belle in the rearview mirror. The truck that had started this journey sat in the barnyard, rust and all, a testament to the value of things that endure. The epilogue to Sterling's week on the farm would be written in boardrooms and fields across America. His firm's new approach to rural investment created a model that preserved agricultural heritage while enabling sustainable growth. Communities that had resisted corporate intervention found partners who understood their values. Sam Whitfield continued farming, but now also served as an advisor to agricultural investors, teaching them the lessons he'd taught Sterling. Emma graduated and returned to expand the family farm, implementing innovations that respected tradition. And somewhere in a Manhattan office, a small model of a 1978 Ford F-150 sat on Harrison Sterling's desk, a daily reminder that the most valuable assets aren't always the shiniest, that wisdom often wears work boots, and that sometimes the best way forward is to understand where you've been. The morning he'd mocked a rusty truck seemed a lifetime ago. The mud that had trapped his expensive car had ultimately freed his understanding. And in learning to read the language of soil and seasons, Sterling had discovered a deeper literacy, one that measured wealth not just in dollars, but in the sustainable prosperity of communities and the enduring wisdom of those who feed the world. As Sam liked to say when asked about that famous week, money can buy a lot of things, but it can't buy understanding. That has to be earned, one blister at a time. 2 years after Sterling's transformative week on the Whitfield farm, the landscape of rural investment had undergone a seismic shift. The Whitfield-Sterling Rural Preservation Initiative had expanded from a pilot program to a national movement, with chapters in 37 states and a waiting list of communities seeking partnerships. Sterling's corner office now featured a wall of photographs, not of ribbon-cutting ceremonies or groundbreaking events, but of working farms, thriving small towns, and the people who made them successful. The annual shareholders' meeting was approaching, and Sterling found himself preparing in a way his former self would have found incomprehensible. Instead of polished PowerPoint presentations and market projection charts, he arranged for shareholders to visit actual project sites, to meet farmers and small business owners whose lives had been improved by patient capital and respectful partnership. "Harrison, the board's nervous about this approach," Victoria Chen confided as they reviewed the meeting agenda. She had stayed with the company through its transformation, becoming Sterling's chief operating officer and the bridge between traditional finance and their new rural-focused philosophy. Some investors still expect conventional metrics, quarterly, returns, market share growth. Sterling looked up from a report on soil regeneration in Nebraska. "Then they need to learn what I learned. Real growth can't be measured in quarters. It's measured in generations." The week before the meeting, Sterling received a call that would have once seemed impossible. President Walsh herself wanted to visit the original Whitfield farm as part of her rural infrastructure tour, specifically requesting that both Sterling and Sam be present to discuss their model's success. Sam, now 70 years old, but still working his land with the same steady determination, greeted the news with characteristic practicality. "Suppose we'll need to clean up the barn then." The presidential visit brought unprecedented attention to Millbrook. Secret Service advance teams swept through town, their black SUVs now respectfully navigating the same muddy roads where their colleagues had once been stranded. Local businesses prepared for the influx of media and dignitaries, with Hank's Diner becoming an unofficial press center. On the morning of the visit, Sterling arrived early at the Whitfield farm. He found Sam in the equipment shed performing maintenance on Old Belle. The truck, now famous beyond anyone's imagination, had been offered spots in museums and corporate collections, but remained exactly where it belonged, in service on the farm. "Nervous?" Sterling asked, noting Sam's extra attention to detail. "About meeting the president?" "Nah. About all these folks trampling my newly planted soybeans. That's another matter." They shared a laugh that spoke of friendship forged through shared work and mutual respect. Emma arrived soon after, now Dr. Emma Whitfield, having completed her doctorate in sustainable agriculture with a dissertation on integrating traditional farming wisdom with modern technology. "Grandpa, Sterling," she greeted them carrying a box of documents. "I've prepared briefing materials for the president on how our model differs from traditional agricultural subsidies." Sterling reviewed the materials with pride. Emma had become a crucial part of their initiative, serving as the scientific bridge between generational knowledge and contemporary research. Her work had proven that many traditional farming practices, dismissed for decades as outdated, were actually more sustainable than their industrial replacements. The motorcade arrived precisely at 10, though this time the vehicles kept to the reinforced paths Sam had specified. President Walsh emerged from her limousine wearing practical shoes, a detail noted approvingly by the local crowd. She approached Sam directly, extending her hand. "Mr. Whitfield, I've been looking forward to this visit. Your collaboration with Mr. Sterling has become a case study in my administration's approach to rural development." Sam shook her hand firmly. "Ma'am, all we did was show that listening works better than dictating, not exactly revolutionary." "Sometimes the most revolutionary ideas are the simplest ones," the president replied. "Shall we tour your operation?" Beat. The next 2 hours provided a masterclass in practical policy. Sam demonstrated water management systems that had evolved over generations, while Emma explained the science behind why they worked. Sterling outlined the financial frameworks that made such operations economically viable without sacrificing their essential character. At one point, they paused by the spot where the president's motorcade had been stuck 2 years earlier. The area had been transformed into a demonstration wetland, showing how proper water management could prevent future incidents while creating habitat for wildlife. "This is what happens when you work with natural systems instead of against them," Emma explained. "The spring that caused the mud problem now feeds a controlled wetland that helps filter agricultural runoff." The president's economic advisors took copious notes as Sterling detailed the initiative's financial outcomes. "Traditional investment metrics showed negative returns for the first 18 months, he admitted. "But when we expanded our analysis to include community health indicators, environmental improvements, and long-term sustainability, the real value became clear." "And now?" the president asked. "Now we're seeing financial returns that match or exceed traditional agricultural investments, but with additional benefits that don't show up on standard balance sheets. Reduced soil erosion, improved water quality, stronger rural communities, preserved cultural heritage." The visit culminated in a round-table discussion in the Whitfield barn, where local farmers, business owners, and community leaders shared their experiences with the new investment model. The stories were compelling. Family farms saved from bankruptcy, young people returning to rural communities, innovations that respected tradition while embracing progress. After the president departed, Sam and Sterling sat on the farmhouse porch, watching the sunset paint the fields golden. The media circus was packing up, the security perimeter dissolving, Millbrook returning to its normal rhythm. "Think it made a difference?" Sam asked. Sterling considered the question. "The president's visit? It'll help with policy, certainly. But the real difference happened 2 years ago when you taught me to see what I'd been blind to. You were ready to learn. That's what made the difference." The shareholders' meeting the following week bore no resemblance to Sterling Capital's previous gatherings. Instead of a hotel ballroom, it took place across 3 days at various project sites. Investors found themselves touring farms, visiting rural manufacturing facilities, and attending community meetings. The initial skepticism from some shareholders gave way to understanding as they witnessed the tangible results of patient, respectful investment. A tech billionaire, known for his impatience with traditional industries, spent an afternoon learning about crop rotation from a fourth-generation farmer. A hedge fund manager discovered that the mathematical models she used for market prediction had parallels in generational weather pattern knowledge. The meeting's pivotal moment came when Sam Whitfield addressed the assembled investors. He spoke not of financial returns, but of responsibility to the land, to communities, to future generations. His words, simple and direct, carried the weight of lived experience. "Money's like water," he told them. "It can erode everything in its path or it can nourish growth. Depends on how you channel it." And the vote on continuing the rural initiative passed unanimously, with several major investors pledging additional capital for expansion. More significantly, 3 competing investment firms approached Sterling about adopting similar models, recognizing that the future of rural investment lay in partnership, not exploitation. 6 months later, Emma Whitfield Rodriguez stood before Congress, testifying about the success of their model as lawmakers debated the new Farm Bill. Her presentation included data on improved soil health, increased biodiversity, and strengthened rural economies. But she began with a story about a rusty truck and a muddy morning that changed everything. "My grandfather's 1978 Ford F-150 isn't just a vehicle," she told the assembled representatives. "It's a symbol of the resilience, ingenuity, and practical wisdom that built this nation. When we learn to value that wisdom, to partner with it rather than dismiss it, we unlock possibilities for sustainable prosperity that benefit all Americans." The resulting legislation, informally known as the Whitfield-Sterling Act, created federal support for investment models that prioritized long-term sustainability over short-term extraction. It required investors seeking agricultural tax benefits to demonstrate understanding of local conditions and community needs. A direct result of Sterling's muddy humiliation and subsequent education. As the years passed, the impact of that spring morning in Millbrook rippled outward in ways no one could have predicted. Business schools added rural residency requirements to their curricula. Agricultural conferences featured panels on the Old Belle principle, the idea that true value often lies beneath surface appearances. Small towns across America found new hope as investment flowed in with respect rather than condescension. Sterling's transformation became legendary in financial circles. He regularly spoke at conferences, always beginning with the same image: his Maybach stuck in Iowa mud, while a 1978 Ford F-150 prepared to rescue the president. "That moment," he would say, "I learned that wisdom isn't about having all the answers. It's about knowing which questions to ask and who to ask them." The ripple effects reached international shores. Developing nations facing agricultural challenges invited Sam and Sterling to share their model. They traveled together, the farmer and the financier, demonstrating that sustainable development required both traditional knowledge and modern resources applied with humility and respect. On the 5th anniversary of their first meeting, Millbrook hosted what became known as the Rural Wisdom Summit. Representatives from 6 continents gathered to discuss how the Whitfield-Sterling model could address global challenges from food security to climate change. The summit sessions took place not in conference rooms, but in fields, barns, and community centers. Old Belle, now bearing a special preservation status that allowed her to remain a working vehicle, served as unofficial mascot. Attendees lined up to photograph the famous truck, its rust now stabilized but still visible, a reminder that beauty and value aren't always synonymous with polish and newness. During the summit's closing ceremony, President Walsh returned to Millbrook to announce a new international initiative based on the Whitfield-Sterling principles. "5 years ago," she said, "this community taught our nation a valuable lesson about the relationship between wisdom and progress. Today, we extend that lesson to the world." Sam, uncomfortable with the spotlight but recognizing its importance, spoke briefly. "Farming teaches you that every solution creates new challenges. Every harvest requires new planting. What we've started here isn't an end, it's a beginning. The real work continues tomorrow and the day after, season after season." Sterling followed, his words reflecting the profound change in his worldview. "I spent the first 45 years of my life believing that progress meant replacing the old with the new. The last 5 years have taught me that true progress means understanding what to preserve, what to improve, and what to transform. That wisdom exists in every community, if we're humble enough to seek it." The summit concluded with the establishment of the Global Rural Wisdom Network, connecting traditional knowledge holders with sustainable development resources worldwide. Its headquarters fittingly occupied a renovated building in downtown Millbrook, bringing international attention and economic vitality to the small Iowa town. As attendees departed, many stopped by the Whitfield farm for one final visit. They found Sam in his usual place, working in the fields, preparing for the next season. Old Belle sat nearby, ready for whatever task might arise. Mr. Whitfield, a young entrepreneur from Kenya, asked, "What advice would you give to someone trying to bring this model to their community?" Sam leaned on his shovel, considering the question with the same care he gave to all important matters. Listen first. Work second. Change happens at the speed of trust, not the speed of money. And remember, the fanciest solution isn't always the best one. Sometimes what you need is already there, just waiting to be recognized. That evening, as the sun set over Millbrook for the countless time, Sam and Sterling sat on the farmhouse porch, a ritual that had become precious to both men. The fancy cars and international delegates were gone, leaving only the eternal rhythm of rural life. "Never thought that morning at Hank's diner would lead to all this," Sterling mused, watching Emma's children play in the yard, the sixth generation of Whitfields on this land. "Every big change starts with a small moment," Sam replied. "Question is whether folks are willing to learn from those moments." The conversation drifted to future plans, new initiatives, upcoming challenges, the next generation's role in continuing their work. But underlying it all was the fundamental truth they had discovered together, that wisdom and progress weren't opposites but partners, that respect and prosperity could coexist, and that sometimes the most valuable assets were the ones that showed their age. As darkness fell, Old Belle's silhouette remained visible against the barn, a rusty reminder that true worth isn't measured in shine or status, but in service and reliability. The truck that had rescued a president had done something far more significant. It had rescued a nation's understanding of its own rural heritage and potential. Years later, when historians wrote about the transformation of American rural investment, they would mark its beginning with a simple moment, a wealthy man mocking a farmer's truck, only to discover that the rust he scorned concealed a strength he had never imagined. It became a parable for a generation learning to look beyond surface judgments to find deeper value. Harrison Sterling III retired at 65, dividing his time between consulting for sustainable development projects and working on the Whitfield farm during planting and harvest seasons. His memoir, Lessons from the Mud, How a Rusty Truck Taught Me to See America, became required reading in business schools worldwide. Sam Whitfield lived to 96, working his land until the very end. His funeral drew thousands, farmers and financiers, politicians and professors, all united by the wisdom he had shared. Old Belle led the funeral procession, driven by Emma, now carrying forward the legacy of practical wisdom and principled stewardship. The Whitfield Sterling Rural Preservation Initiative continued to grow, eventually influencing policy in 43 countries. Its core principle remained unchanged from that muddy morning in Iowa. True progress comes not from imposing solutions, but from understanding problems, not from dismissing tradition, but from building upon it, not from mocking what we don't understand, but from learning with humility. And in small towns across America and beyond, when someone dismissed local knowledge in favor of distant expertise, people would share the story of the executive who mocked a farmer's rusty truck, only to learn that the most valuable lessons often come in the humblest packages, and that wisdom, like good soil, is enriched by experience and time. The morning confrontation at Hank's diner had become more than a local legend. It had become a turning point in how the modern world understood the relationship between progress and tradition, between urban knowledge and rural wisdom, between the shine of new technology and the reliability of proven methods. As Sam had said that first morning, defending Old Belle against Sterling's mockery, "She's built for real work, not showing off." Those words echoed through the years, reminding each new generation that true value isn't always visible on the surface. That judgment without understanding is the enemy of progress, and that sometimes the rustiest truck in the parking lot might just be the one capable of pulling the future out of the mud. In the end, the story of Sterling and Sam, of Old Belle and the Maybach, became a testament to the transformative power of humility, the value of practical wisdom, and the truth that America's strength lay not in its divisions, but in its ability to bridge them. The mud that had trapped a president's limousine had ultimately cleared the path to a new understanding of what made communities thrive and what made a nation truly prosperous. And Old Belle? She remained on active duty, her odometer long since rolled over, her engine rebuilt with parts machined by a new generation of farmers who understood both traditional mechanics and modern engineering. She became a symbol not just of the past, but of the future. A future built on respect for what works, wisdom about what matters, and the courage to admit when we're wrong. The last image in Sterling's memoir showed him and Sam standing beside Old Belle, both men smiling, their handshake bridging more than just two lives. It connected two Americas that had finally learned to speak the same language. The caption read simply, "Sometimes the best investment you can make is in understanding." As thousands of readers closed that book, inspired to look at their own communities with new eyes, the legacy of a rusty truck and a muddy morning continued to grow, proving that the most profound changes often begin with the simplest truths, and that wisdom, wherever it's found, is worth more than all the gold on Wall Street. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.